Hi, nice to see you all. Can you hear me? Yeah, can you see me, more importantly? I'm standing on a box because I'm such a midget, so excuse me, I hopefully won't fall off of it. So today's session, Who Moved My Wellbeing Strategy, is a play on this book, Who Moved My Cheese. People familiar with it? Yeah, some nods, some not so sure. So Who Moved My Cheese is a story about four characters who live in a maze and who all like eating cheese. And one day the cheese disappears. So two of the characters, Scurry and Sniff, head off into the maze to go and find new cheese, whilst the other two, Haw and Hem, stay behind and complain. And they waste their time and their energy waiting for new cheese to come, but it doesn't. So Haw eventually heads off into the maze, and on the way, on his journey, he writes things on the wall, hoping that Hem is going to follow him and find out where he is. Now, he eventually does find new cheese, and he sees that Scurry and Sniff were already there. Now, there is a bit more to the story than that, but fundamentally, the core message of the book is that things constantly change, so we need to adapt. So when the cheese moves, we need to move with it. And in the same way that the characters realised that they needed to adapt and evolve to ensure a continuous supply of cheese, in the last year in particular, has really illustrated we can't assume that our wellbeing proposition is still relevant for the world that we now live in. Society and the way that wellbeing is managed has changed. The NHS is in crisis. We know that there's over 5.5 million people on waiting lists, and the reality is it's going to probably have to prioritise. So things like cancer care may be high up on the list, but for many of us, there'll be aspects of our lives that it's just not going to have the resources to deal with. So you may have employees that are off sick, waiting for operations. You may have employees that are suffering the effects of long COVID. There'll be aspects of lives that, 1 in 3 of us suffer from insomnia. 1 in 7 of us suffer from infertility problems. But these things are just going to get pushed down the list because they're just not going to be prioritised. The way that we think about the environment and sustainability has changed too, and continues to change. So COVID, global movements like Me Too, Black Lives Matter have really amplified our social conscience and really highlighted some of the real great inequities in our society. It's not okay to treat people differently just because that's the way we've always done it, or pollute our planet with plastic gimmicks. Having an ethical and responsible lens on your well-being is really expected. And it's not just having one, it's what you do with it. But fundamentally, employee expectations have also changed. Quite rightly, many organisations have supported employees with additional mental health support, levelled up pre-existing sickness benefits, and supported employees to work from home. People have taken up new activities and really evaluated what's important to them in their lives. But many people are also really burnt out from the last year. They've either worked their socks off to keep things going, or have maybe been made redundant or furloughed and felt isolated and undervalued. The people have been worrying about their finances, how they're going to recover. We did a recent survey that said 1 in 5 people experienced some kind of depression during the pandemic. And there's other surveys that have suggested that 9 million adults say they're often or always lonely. And on top of all of this, just because we haven't got enough, the marketplace is really hotting up. We've seen skill shortages in sectors like haulage, retail, hospitality, digital. And as a result, we've seen starting salaries being hiked up. We've seen referral bonuses, sign-on bonuses, iPhones, just to get people in through the door. But is increasing the monetary value of the package enough to attract them? The world of work has changed. What was important before is perhaps not as important now. People not only enjoy flexibility, it's become an expectation. Some people don't want to go out to the workplace at all. Most of us want some kind of flexibility in the way that we work. And a study by EY said that half the people they spoke to said that they would consider changing jobs if flexible working wasn't an option. So as an employer, all of these factors now sit at your feet. How do you balance the fact that you're going to potentially have to plug some of the gaps in NHS provision, ensure whatever approach you take is seen as fair, equitable, and embraces diversity, and factors in what's truly meaningful for your employees? That's no mean feat. Now, before COVID, different organisations were on different journeys with regards to their well-being. So some would potentially have random benefits that are maybe not connected. Others of you maybe have a clear proposition that aligns your well-being to the various pillars of physical, mental, social, and financial well-being. COVID, however, has changed the landscape, even for those of you that had a fairly clear view of your proposition before. It's been an accelerator, a magnifier, and a kick up the arse all at the same time. It's moved beyond being an HR agenda to a human agenda. It's no longer enough to say, we've got an EAP, yeah, we can tick the box on mental health, or we've got gym discounts, yeah, we've got physical well-being covered. Well-being is more than having a hub of content or a one-hit wonder. If you want to win in the evolving landscape of work or cheese moving, you need to think differently. You need to move away from thinking that initiatives are a strategy, because they're not. A strategy is a long-term plan of action that uses resources to achieve your well-being goals or solutions. You need to be using the power of tech to really engage and connect with your workforce, making that communication real and human. And as a responsible employer, you need to be able to demonstrate the impact and the effectiveness of your well-being proposition to avoid well-being washing, so when talk doesn't meet action. So this moves simply having policies or initiatives to actually communicating outcome metrics that show how and whether you're treating your employees fairly, something that evidences practice and not intent. So I'm just going to go on and talk about these three elements in just a little bit more detail. Now, defining a wellbeing strategy is something that most people say is a priority, but doesn't necessarily happen in reality. It was recently illustrated in a report where executives, it was about half of the executives that were asked said that employee wellbeing was a top workforce concern, but less than a third of HR leaders said they actually had a health and wellbeing strategy in place. So what about you guys? How many of you can hands on heart say you've got a joined up wellbeing strategy that's more than a list of benefits? So we were going to do this on Slido, but we haven't got access to that. So you've got four options here of we don't have a strategy, we've got disparate benefits that aren't joined up, we've got some integration between the pillars, but not necessarily defined strategy, and we've got a clearly defined strategy. Can you put your hands up if you would think you don't have a wellbeing strategy? That's more than I thought, actually. We have disparate benefits that aren't joined up. Yeah. Some integration between the pillars, but not necessarily a defined strategy. Yeah. And we have a clearly defined wellbeing strategy. Few people, but some of you do. So quite a mix. A strategy is more than just a list of benefits under each of the various pillars. A good strategy is really clear about what your end goals are. What is it you're trying to achieve through wellbeing for the longer term? And how does it link to your people plan and your business goals? Now, one of our clients, for example, talked about giving employees the opportunity to do their best work, and then they then go on to define what this looks like under each of the four pillars. So under mental health, for example, they talk about and have clear objectives about creating an open culture where employees feel that they can talk about stress and mental health and providing better access to support and advice. But they then go on to explain and define more specific goals with measurable outcomes. So one of their goals, for example, is to increase the number of employees who know how to access support and advice by 30%. And they then go on to explain how they're going to do this, through what initiatives, and how they're going to measure it. And other organisations use frameworks like the Workwell model that's on the slide there. That was developed by Business in the Community, and that's to help embed health and wellbeing in cultures. So to create an impactful strategy, you need to first identify, act, and on the changing needs of your employees. You need to understand and clarify who is it that you are as an employer, what do you stand for as a business, and how should your approach to well-being support that? What's your people agenda, and what are you prepared to invest in? In this competitive marketplace, how do you want to set yourselves apart from the competition, and how can you use benefits and well-being to support that? And what USPs can you leverage? So every organisation will have certain things that are unique to them. So one of our clients, for example, provides loyalty points to people for travel. It's a great benefit, but they really struggle to articulate it to employees. So you will all have things in your locker that you can use and you can leverage more to really elevate your proposition around who you are as a business. But it's also really critical to find out what it is your employees want. People's perceptions about what they value has probably changed in the last year. COVID has forced many of us to really reconsider how we want to spend our time and what it is we really value. I saw yesterday there was a raconteur have done a lovely graphic, and it shows what people want versus what employees provide. And there is definitely a distinction in terms of what it is that people want. So asking people now might give you very different answers to maybe what people would have said 18 months ago. And from here, you can start to identify the gaps between your current and your ideal proposition, what the cost of new initiatives might be, how it's going to help you achieve your strategic ambitions, and what your return on investment might be to help make sure that you get support from senior managers. Now, there was a study by Deloitte on mental health, and they looked at the return on investment that you might get. And they were suggesting that on average, for every £1 you spend, you could expect to get a £5 return. But it really does vary on the nature of the intervention. So proactive initiatives would get you something like a 6-to-1 return, whereas more of a reactive initiative, something like an EAP, would only get you a 3-to-1 return. And there are some really significant benefits to the organisation of getting your wellbeing strategy right. Studies have shown there's a direct correlation to improvements to wellbeing having a positive impact on customer satisfaction and customer retention. And we also know there's a really strong link between turnover and wellbeing. So employers who create cultures of health see much lower turnover than employers who don't prioritise health and well-being. Now, one of the most critical elements of landing your wellbeing strategy is how you communicate it. It's no good having an amazing proposition with ambitious goals if nobody knows about it. But that is actually the reality for many organisations. Vitality did a survey, and they found that for small organisations, they would have maybe on average 25 health interventions initiatives, and for medium to large organisations, this could be 30 or more. But they also found that only a third of employees actually knew what support was available. That is a complete waste of money in my book. Now, pre-pandemic, surveys suggested that most communication around wellbeing was done either through posters, email, leaflets, or dedicated pages on the intranet. But if we're not in the office regularly, and we're out and about, or we're so busy we don't have time to look on the intranet or our email, we can miss this messaging. And that's where the role of tech has really stepped up, and I think is the future direction. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm permanently attached to my phone. It's the first thing I look at in the morning. It's the last thing I look at night. And we're all using our phones and tech more and more to manage and monitor things like our sleep, our diet, our fitness, or to do things like video calls with GPs. And I suspect this has only really increased over the last year. So it makes sense to equip your employees with the digital tools that they need to take control of their own well-being. So using wellbeing platforms that you can access via your mobile phone means that your employees can be connected to your wellbeing proposition. You can send push notifications, which means that you can get in touch with people when they're out and about and maybe on the front line or disconnected. Every time you message them, whether it's via the app, it's a reminder of everything that you're providing them. And actually having something all in one place really enables you to leverage your ability to create a seamless proposition. We're all dealing with different suppliers. We've got different suppliers for pension, for healthcare, for gym. But having it in that one place really means that you can, not only with a single sign-on, means that you can access them and speed up that interaction. So if you desperately need to have video GP or EAP, it's all there in the palm of your hand. So fundamentally, you want your wellbeing proposition to be at the forefront of your employees' minds, reinforcing why you offer these benefits in the first place, which is to support them. Now, we know that supporting employees with wellbeing is not only the right thing to do, but it benefits our businesses, both in terms of happier and more productive employees, but also gives us longer-term cost savings in things like absence and turnover. But getting that measurement bit right is really tricky. As we've seen, most of us manage our wellbeing in quite a disconnected way. And according to a survey that REBA did, only 1 in 7 organisations actually calculate the return on investment on their benefit spend. Why? Because it's really hard. It's not an easy thing to do. It means that you've got to pull together information, often from very disparate sources, and make sense of it. And that's something we've been trying to do at Innecto. We've created a framework we call the Wellbeing Dashboard, and it aims to sharpen the focus on each pillar of wellbeing so that you can understand which dimension is having the most impact, and you can then align the outputs to your strategic intent. So it starts by creating a baseline picture of how employees feel now via a questionnaire, and you overlay other data sites, as well as using ONS wellbeing data on wellbeing. And it gives you a wellbeing score. And you can then look at it and dissect it by demographics. So you can look at it regionally, by department, by age, by gender, whatever data you have available. And it means that you can identify which wellbeing dimensions are the primary driver for lower or higher wellbeing for different employee groups, and maybe which are the secondary drivers. So you can tailor your wellbeing proposition to the needs of your organisation. And this gives you a tracking model. So it means that you can see how effective your wellbeing strategy is and whether it's actually making a difference, where to direct your investment, how your organisation compares to the average wellbeing data nationally, whether employees are even engaged enough for it to make a difference. Now, there's no legal requirements to currently report on wellbeing, but more and more organisations are doing it through their ESG reporting. So if you can evidence how you make a difference, how you're treating your employees and what impact that's having, this is something that is really keenly sought by investors, external stakeholders, prospective employees. You're being judged in your organisation by what is and what isn't put out there. So why not make sure that the perception meets reality and demonstrate using this kind of dashboard how you're monitoring and adjusting your wellbeing focus? So you need to make sure your proposition remains relevant. So you need to be continually reviewing it and making sure it's still fit for purpose. So going back to the characters and their cheese, you need to be ready for the cheese to move. So don't wait for it to smell before you do something about it. Anticipate the future changes, keep reinforcing that feedback loop, and keep moving with the cheese to stay ahead of the game. Thank you.